Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. So today we are doing the building blocks of financial advocacy. So we'll start with kind of a general overview of just how to do advocacy throughout the year, and then we'll specifically move into more financial advocacy, so around property taxes and school funding. So I am Michelle Johnson. I'm the Government Relations Director here at IASB. So I do a lot of our grassroots advocacy as well as lobbying. And then I'm joined by Mike Guanci.
Yeah, hi, I'm Mike Lancy, the Associate Executive Director for Government Relations and School Finance, and I get to do a lot of the finance and worksheets and all the toolkits that you see on our website.
And then we'll be joined by Tracy Azello from the Council Bluffs School Districts to give kind of a board member perspective on advocacy as well. So just a quick overview of the goals for today. So we'll start very broad and basic, how to start and maintain a relationship with your legislator. And then we kind of split the year into two parts. So what to do during the legislative session in terms of advocacy, and then what to do during the interim, because they do differ a little bit. And then how you can get involved through IASB. And then we'll answer any questions, of course, that you guys have. So we'll start off with how to start a relationship with your legislator. Some of you may already know your legislator. They may be a friend, a colleague, someone who lives in your town, but it's a little different when they switch to legislator. But if you don't know your legislator, no worries. You can easily find them on the legislative website. So it's in there. If you go to the legislative website, you can find it. You can also do it by school district. So some of your school districts have several legislators that represent them. So they might not be yours personally at your home address, but they will be your school district's legislator as well. So the easiest thing you can do is send an introduction email, who you are, I'm on the school board, or I'm running for the school board, where you live. Just a very basic introduction email works. And then sign up for your legislators' newsletters. This is where they provide a lot of where they'll be, if they're having a meeting at a coffee shop or doing something in the community, so you can meet them there. And that leads me to attending a local forum. Sometimes it seems intimidating. A lot of times you see that these are a controversial back and forth, but a lot of times it's just a chat around a table at a coffee shop, a Casey's, the library, something like that. So they're not as intimidating as they're made out to be a lot of places. And then you can also follow your legislator on social media. This is where they'll, again, put a lot of information of where they are. It also leads you to learn a lot about their priorities or what they're interested in if you can see what they're posting on social media. So once you've kind of introduced yourself and started that relationship, it's very important to maintain that relationship throughout the year. So you can invite them to your schools or to a school board meeting if you're currently on the board. This is a great way to showcase public schools generally. It's also a way to show them what their decisions do to your school district. So if it's negative or positive, show them the impact that their decisions at the legislature have on your local district. When an issue does come up, call or email them. They want to know right away as soon as possible because they're making decisions quickly. So always stay in contact with them about how you think a bill or even something that's happening in your district might impact them. We always say to share positive news from your school district. As we know, negative news is often what makes the news. So they don't hear about a lot of the positive stuff that's happening in your school district. So definitely share that with them. They like to hear it. It makes them feel good. They'll probably put it on their social media, that kind of stuff. The other thing that we've seen that works pretty well is if you collaborate with other districts near you. So if you have several school boards or just people that want to get together and do a bigger legislative forum or come to your school and then go to their school, sometimes it works better for a legislator to have more than one thing on their agenda. They're more likely to show up if they know they'll get to see more people and more constituents. So that's worked really well the past couple of years for districts around the state, is kind of to collaborate with each other rather than just doing it on your own. So this is kind of where we're going to talk about the differences between what you should do during the legislative session, which is from January to April or May, depending on the year, and then in the interim, which is the rest of the year. So the summer and then the fall, the time we're in right now. So during the legislative session, this is when legislators are coming to Des Moines during the week, and then they're at home on the weekends. So this is where you want to talk to legislators about specific issues and bills, not just generalities. You really got to focus on something that's before them at the moment. So, they have a lot coming at them. They have other stuff outside of education. So you want to have something specific to talk to them about. This leads to less time with your legislator because, again, they have a lot of other commitments. They're in Des Moines. Other people are trying to get their attention. So be concise. This is not a time to, have a 30-minute conversation in generalities. You definitely want to make 2 or 3 main points about the bill you're trying to talk to them about. While you're doing that, explain the impact on your district and on your students. This is what they need to know when they come back and talk to their colleagues about if they should go forward with a bill or change it or just table it, all of that kind of stuff. They want to know the impact on their specific school districts. And that's where IASB comes in. If you don't know what to say or you don't know what the exact impact is, we can totally help you there. And again, timely advocacy. Things move fast during the legislative session. By February, they've kind of narrowed down a lot of what they're going to talk about. So if you see something, bring it up to your legislator right away. So the legislative session in general, more concise, less time with your legislators. So be prepared on what you want to talk about and try to keep it as short as possible. So then switching to the interim, which is again when they're not in session, so they're spending obviously their time at home, not in Des Moines. Do remember that your legislators are citizen legislators, so this is not their full-time job. They probably have an actual job in your community, so they aren't going to be available all the time, but they do have more time. So you can kind of advocate generally for your district, talk, proactively about what you'd like to see them do, what your district's priorities are. Even if it doesn't relate to a specific bill that's been talked about, you can still talk about what your district would like to see from them. This is also a great time to get to know your legislators' education priorities. So you can just ask them, if you had a chance to work on a bill relating to education, what would it be? How can we help you? Do you need anything from us? And then that kind of leads into offer to be a resource for your legislator. They are not experts in everything. Some of them, they might not have been in a school since they've been in school. They just don't know a lot about education. They might not serve on the education committee. So it's your job to be that expert and that resource on all things education and specifically your school district. And if you don't know an answer to something, it's okay to say, I don't know, but I can find out for you. Superintendents and SBOs are great, a resource. And then obviously you can always turn to IASB as well if you need more information for a legislator, but you definitely know more than them about your school district. I can almost guarantee you that. So don't be nervous talking to them about education. You are more of the expert in that conversation. So just to recap, in the interim, there's more time, you can talk in more generalities, and you can kind of be more proactive is what I always say. Talk about what you want to see them do rather than just reacting to a bill that's being proposed during the session. So I know we probably have some school board candidates rather than just current school board members on the webinar today, which is very exciting. So if you're a candidate, a lot of this still applies. You are a constituent always of your legislator. You don't have to be on the school board to be able to talk about education issues or whatever you want with your legislator. So a lot of this still applies. You can introduce yourself, say, I'm running for school board. I hope to be on the school board. And then why did you decide to run for the school board is probably very important to legislators. Let them know what you hope to accomplish and how you'd like to accomplish that kind of in conjunction with the legislature, because as much as some of us hate it, the legislature does determine a lot of what we can accomplish as school districts. And then share your priorities should you be elected. What do you want to work on in your district? Again, how can that relate to them? And then offer yourself as a resource right away. So IASB obviously offers a lot of advocacy opportunities. We want you to get involved. So our big organized advocacy activity is our Day on the Hill that we host every year. So we partner with SAI, which is the School Administrators of Iowa, and then the AEAs. So it's kind of a show of public school force up at the Capitol. We invite students to display, innovative programs or what they're doing in their districts. So having the students there really helps draw legislators in. It gives us an opportunity to talk to a bunch of legislators all in the same day, generally with the same talking points. So this year, or I guess in 2026, it'll be on January 26th, which is really good timing. For those of you who don't know, school funding is always set generally fairly early in session. So this will give us a chance to be there, hopefully before they've set that school funding amount. And it's always good to advocate for that along with anything else you want to. IASB also sends out action requests from time to time if we really need to mobilize all of our membership on a certain issue, we'll send that out to everybody. A lot of times we do specific outreach coming from yours truly. So if you get an email from me, feel lucky. It probably means you have a legislator who's making important decisions, and we really want you to specifically reach out to them about an impact on a bill in your area. That's a lot of times how we do it. We just call that targeted advocacy. Sometimes it works a little bit better if we're focusing on a few legislators that maybe have a swing vote, aren't sure how to vote, or are influential within their caucus so they can kind of convince their colleagues one way or another. Those are a lot of the things we think about when we're doing that specific outreach and advocacy. And then coming up very soon in November is our delegate assembly. So this is where we approve our legislative platform, which includes our overall beliefs and then our specific resolutions, which are more specific policy areas. So every school district can send a school board member to participate and vote. So if your school district hasn't registered a delegate already, maybe that could be you. But that's coming up in November, and we do that in conjunction with our convention every year. So now I'm going to bring on Tracy, who is from Council Bluffs, to get some tips from an actual board member who has done advocacy before. She also serves on IASB's Legislative Resolutions Committee, which is the committee who kind of develops our platform. So she has a lot of experience on the legislative side and then advocacy-wise. So Tracy, are you ready? Would you like to introduce yourself?
I am.
Awesome, thank you. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
So I'm Tracy Ozello. As of November, I'll be starting my third year in Council Bluffs School Board. Advocacy wise, I always said when I was campaigning, I've served as a court appointed special advocate in my community for 4 or 5 years now. And prior to that, I'm a nurse by trade, and then I transitioned to higher education. So have spent time not only advocating for the vulnerable youth in our community, but for patients, for students. So it really, advocacy wise, flows kind of nicely from my background. So
Awesome. Well, I'll just go ahead and get started and ask you some of the pressing questions. So how did you first meet your legislators? How did you introduce yourself?
So I think in our community, we're actually very fortunate. We invite our legislators to our first board meeting in January. So I had got sworn in, had I think one meeting, been to convention, and then I met them. So in mixed in with the holidays. So definitely kind of still was getting my bearings, but was able to meet with them. And then this last January, we took a very targeted kind of approach, and that might not sound the best, but every school board member was assigned a topic that kind of aligned with what our strategies were and what we were seeing specific in our community. And so, for example, my topic was mental health, which again worked very well with the mental health we see in our higher ed students, as well as within nursing. So just, we all had our topic, we all did our research, we were all very prepared. So we weren't wasting their time. We were able to clearly and concisely convey our concerns for what was coming. So that was, I think, I guess appreciated by them, so that they really understood where we were coming from.
So how do you maintain that relationship? Not just by having them with you, but how do you maintain it, outside of a specific board meeting?
So another thing that is really nice in our area is throughout the entire legislative session, our Chamber of Commerce hosts legislative coffees, usually twice a month. And there you can go and interact with our legislators. So that's also a very nice way to be there. You can ask them questions, to interact with them. You can email them. I'm hoping this year I can make it today on the Hill now that I don't have any kids left in school. So that'll be nice. Once in a while you do run into them in out in the community. So I always, if you do see them, just kind of always go up and say hi. Because if you're not familiar, council bluffs are about 60,000. So it's not unheard of to run into somebody out in our community.
So how does your board as a whole discuss advocacy at the board table? Do you guys make a plan? Do you split it up? It kind of sounds like you did do that this past year.
Yeah, last year, we took, when they came and visited us, we all had topics. And then we do a summer retreat with our board, which is just a day long, and really look at the different components of board action. And this year, one of the things we chose as a board as a whole is to work on advocacy and kind of educating our community in ways on what we do, what's the legislature, do. So taking that opportunity, so something as simple as like our board meeting last night, we assigned our delegate. So then I took that opportunity to say, okay, this is what the delegate means. This is why that person is chosen. We spent a little bit of time talking about why convention was important. And then also that they had a board member that was in the LRC, so that they were able to see that their board is engaged in advocacy initiatives beyond just our district.
So when you invite legislators to your district, what does that look like? How do you get them to show up?
They invite them, actually. Our district invites them. I think as a newer board member, we're very fortunate that our superintendent really does have a good working relationship with our legislators as well as our governor. So that kind of helped pave the way, I think, for us, is that positive relationship was there. And I think that's also something important to remember, that even if, you know, your time on the board is temporary, that you try to maintain that so that you don't kind of poison that chalice for people that are going to come behind you, and that person may still be in the legislature. So that, I think, is also important, to try to be cordial.
Yes, that is such a good reminder. That kind of leads me to my next question. So have you experienced a legislator who maybe doesn't always align with your priorities? And then how do you handle that?
We do, actually. So we have one of our legislators actually worked with our AEAs. So that was a benefit. However, I know he has mentioned a few times that then that has got him unfavorable kind of with his party because of his background with that. So he has verbalized that, I know, a few times. The other individual, I would say we are at complete opposite spectrums as far as public education. So that one I struggle with a lot more, just because in trying to be cordial, and I think they try to maintain that cordiality, but I also kind of feel like what we get told in our meeting isn't necessarily what happens. So I don't necessarily feel that that individual is always at least honest with us. Like, at least be honest and say, yeah, I send my kids to parochial school and that kind of thing that we know in the community, but maybe individuals at the state level don't know. So
Okay, well, those are all the specific questions I have for you. Is there any, tidbit of advocacy advice that you want to share with everyone before we go on to Mike?
I think my biggest takeaway is I always want to know what I need to know going in, so I don't look foolish. So in getting prepared for the upcoming legislative session and some of the legislative actions that happened last year, really say I spent some time with our financial officer and kind of getting a better grasp on finance, because I'm a nurse, I'm an educator. I have never been involved with finance, and I am so happy that way. So that I know definitely is kind of my weak point. So really making sure I understand, what I need to be talking about when I am going in. So like mental health, when I talked about that, like I can talk about that for, a day versus how do I go in and talk about finance with someone, and that is definitely not a strong suit of mine. So being prepared, doing your research, and knowing what you need to ask and say going in.
Awesome. Well, IASB does have some resources to help you be prepared, like Tracy said. So you can go on our Advocacy Center on the IASB website. We've got Advocacy 101, which is a lot of what we've covered here today. We also have issue toolkits, which are more specific to topic, specifically, SSA, school funding, that kind of stuff. So if you're, a little weary on the finance side, we can help you there. We also have mental health, a lot of areas on there. And then during the legislative session, we do provide weekly updates. So from me and then Emily Piper, who's our other lobbyist, we try to keep you guys as informed as possible. And if that isn't enough, you can always email or call me, Mike, Emily, whoever here at IASB, and we are happy to get you the information you need. And then these are my final little advocacy tidbits, just generally. Always remember to be civil. Like Tracy said, being cordial. I know sometimes it can be hard, believe me, sometimes you're just getting told stuff that might not be true or you just can't believe it, but always be civil. Always remember that they might be against us 99% of the time, but that 1% of the time we need them, they will remember how you treated them. So always try to be civil. And then thank legislators for their time. Like I said, a lot of them do have other jobs and they are busy. There's a lot of people that want their attention and their time. So be thankful that they did meet with you anytime they do. And then kind of always just keep in the back of your mind what your ultimate goal is, why you ran for the school board, why you're running for the school board, student success in all districts, or whatever that specific mission is to you. Keep that in the back of your mind. And believe me, I know it's hard sometimes, but if you remember that, it'll hopefully help you with your advocacy. So I'm going to stop talking and hand it over to Mike here, who will give you more information on that specific financial advocacy that I think a lot of us probably would find helpful.
Thanks, Michelle. So I really appreciate Michelle's passion for working with school districts and advocacy. So, and I hope Tracy stays on for a minute because I may have a couple questions. Awesome, I got a thumbs up. So, one of the things that I would point out, that when we talk about advocacy is that it isn't just at the Capitol, right? It starts at the board table. And that new school board members really don't need to just understand property taxes. They also need to be able to really know how to communicate, defend, and to be able to advocate for those property taxes. And that sounds strange because it is property taxes and it can be a difficult and sort of complex conversation. But it's really important to really understand the why behind it, right? And property taxes really keep decisions local. Okay, so those local property taxes are the most stable and predictable form of revenue for your school district. As state revenues are purposely being reduced, the state is relying more and more on a single source of income for themselves, which is sales tax. That property taxes remain, that reliable source of local sources to be able to fund your school. And when we talk about that sort of local control, that's important. It actually makes school districts more efficient, I think, because when you're looking at that, homeowners, most of their value and their wealth is tied into their home. So they have a vested interest in property taxes. That means that they have a vested interest in what's going on locally and in school districts. On the positive side with that, though, that means that they're motivated to pay attention to school funding and to school finance at times, and they're motivated and to approve worthwhile spending, which may include renewing your voter PEPAL. It may also include approving a bond resolution. So if school districts really only supported by a single source of revenue, say state aid, residents don't necessarily have that incentive to closely monitor. And that goes both ways, right? You have some people that are monitoring because they're really against that school funding. You have some people that are monitoring because they want to invest in their children, similar to anybody who wants to run for a school board. You're there to invest in your children. You're there to be a part of that process. But relying on that state aid solely or even messing with the balance also reduces flexibility for school districts. And that's important to remember because when right now the state does come in with some targeted funding for property tax relief by reducing that property taxes relying more on state aid, that means it's just going to increase those sort of inequities that school districts can face with the taxable valuations per pupil. And the school board, as a school board member, you play an important role in this whole process, right? So by and large, the biggest thing is that you're adopting an annual certified budget that sets those maximum levy rates early on in the year. And sometimes, unfortunately, you have to do that before you even know what your full funding is going to be. There are times where you have to submit that information to the state and to your counties before SSA has even been set, way before the legislature has come in and decided how much to increase school funding. And so as you set those maximum levy rates, that is what it is. It's the maximum levy rate. You can only go down from there. But it's important because by doing that, you're also providing transparency to your district in explaining the tax rates. And not only explaining the tax rates, it's really important to explain the dollars behind the tax rates and the funding that is generated from those rates. And again, clearly communicating with your community and what it means for their tax bill is extremely important. So when we take a look at this and sort of learn a little bit behind it, there's lots of instances where people don't understand why maybe a district is cutting teachers, but doing something with their athletic facilities, right? And it really comes down to what is known as Dillon's rule. And then that school districts have lots and lots of different funds. But they can only use those funds for specific reasons. So if you are a district that maybe has declining enrollment and you might have to cut some teachers or you can't afford new curriculum for a couple more years, that's all coming out of your general fund. But you have all this money over in your save fund you can't use for those teacher salaries, unfortunately. You can't use for that curriculum. You can only use that for maybe capital projects. So you might unfortunately be right-sizing your district in a way where you are cutting teachers or salaries or anything, but you're also helping improve the facilities that you're building. That really comes down to that Dillon's rule that you really cannot separate those funds. When we really separate it out for the property taxes, though, um, what we're looking at in this slide is we're looking at property taxes and we're looking at the what here and what it funds. But really the most important thing when advocating is that to really tie every levy to what it provides for your students and your community. So you're really going into the who, right? And that is really important to do at a very district level. It should be district specific because that's really where those funds are being spent. A great example might be your debt service, right? So maybe you have a bond resolution coming up. One way to really tie this in and sort of advocate is to think about that kindergartner. Think about a young child, Amanda is starting kindergarten this year. And what does her experience look like in middle school in 5 years from now when you do get to finish that middle school building? What does her experience look like in 3 years from now when she gets that new technology that's coming from your voter PEPL? And that's all property taxes. So it's really important just to really don't stick with the jargon, make it simple, make it understandable, and make it very specific to your district about who benefits most from these. When we kind of get into this again, let's also talk a little bit about how little you do have control as a school board member over this whole process. So Iowa's property tax assessment process starts with the county assessors, right? So you assign a value to that property. That property is classified, whether it's residential, commercial, or agriculture, and that valuation method is applied. Really high level to understand it is residential and commercial. That's sort of based on market value. Okay, so that's what this building or that's what your house, it's what the assessor thinks roughly you could get if you tried to sell that house today. Agriculture is assessed very differently. It's on a productivity value. Apparently I can't talk today. So that productivity value is really based on what kind of income you can earn off the property. And that varies, and it has an incredible impact, especially when we talk about property tax reform and some of the proposals that are out there. But overall, this is part of the process that you have no control over. This is your county assessors, and as a school board member, you're not part of this. So some of the definitions, just to kind of like get us to a base here, when we talk about assessed valuation, again, that is what the assessor thinks that your property may be worth in the real estate market. Take a look at your house and say, you could probably sell this house for $250,000. However, that is not what you're taxed on. Okay. So there is a rollback that the state comes in and says to try and limit the amount of increases every year. And so that rollback is a percentage of the property's assessed valuation. So we're going to roll some of that value back to a taxable valuation. And again, that taxable valuation is really what your property taxes are calculated on. But we also have some other things in here. There's tax exemptions, and this is and tax credits. And it's important to know the difference between the two, because tax exemptions, they reduce the taxable valuation of your property. So if your property's taxable valuation is $150,000, it's going to reduce that by a dollar figure. A tax credit, however, comes at the very end. Once your taxes are calculated using the rate and your taxable valuation, a credit is going to reduce the amount of tax that you owe. So, and then there's other things like a tax abatement that's just similar to a tax credit that looks at it after that property has been assessed and your property taxes have been assessed. So really, when we take this to a $250,000 home here, and we have a tax rate here. So how does this really work? $250,000 home, you have that's set by a county assessor. You have your rollback of 47%, gets you a taxable valuation of a little over $118,000. There may be a tax exemption in there. Let's say there could be a military credit. In this example, I didn't put it in there, but if there was a military credit of $2,000 or some amount of dollars, it would reduce that taxable valuation. And then we get to credits, and really the biggest one that everybody has is a homestead credit. And again, what it does is it takes a look at what is essentially would be your taxable amount. And that credit, it says that it's $4,850. You don't actually get that amount of money off of your property. It's divided by 1,000 and multiplied by your tax rate. So a $250,000 home is essentially going to get you about a $63 credit. Throughout this whole thing, the only part of this process that you have any control over, and it's still some control, is that tax rate at the top. And in this case, I applied a $13 tax rate. So when we talk again about what you have control over and what you don't have control over, what you see here on the screen is really just a lot of the levies, but this is not all of the levies included necessarily. So you have non-discretionary levies, and that really are levies that you have no control over as a school board member. And then you have discretionary levies that you have some control over. So the uniform levy in of itself is only based on taxable valuations. It's not based on enrollment, anything else. So you can see that is absolutely the highest. Additional levy comes in and it's mostly non-discretionary, and that is going to be based on enrollment. It's going to be based on legislative decisions, and it's going to be based on valuations. And then you have your discretionary levies. So something like instructional support levy can be a board decision. Sometimes it's a voter decision. Cash reserve levy is a board decision. But some of these others over in the green, let's say voter PEPL or your debt service, those are voted on at elections, and they either need to be renewed or voted on anew especially with debt service. So local property wealth determines that amount of revenue. It's generated from property taxes for those non-discretionary levies. One of the most important things to know about any school finance funding is that Iowa schools aid system is pupil driven. That means if you have the enrollment there, you'll have the dollars. If you don't have the enrollment there, you will start losing those dollars. And we do this on a per pupil level. So that means that our taxable valuations are also calculated down to a per pupil level. So if you live in what we might consider a property rich district, where you have high valuations per pupil, it doesn't take you a lot to get up to the minimums, and your tax rates are going to be lower. If you are a property poor district, you're not going to generate as much dollars from a tax rate, and you're going to have to increase your tax rates in order to get to the minimum dollars. And there is a really strong correlation between a school district's taxable valuation per pupil and its property tax rate. And you can kind of see that in the blue there, all those little blue dots there are school districts. And that's really your non-discretionary levies there. And then the orange kind of brings in your discretionary levies. But the lower the taxable valuation per pupil, likely the higher your tax rate is, especially if you have cash reserve, management fund, or things that are just very discretionary. Okay. So bottom line though, when we're talking about advocacy, really one of the biggest things that you want to do and you want to be able to work on is to work on communicating those misconceptions and correcting them, right? So school districts don't have a lot of control over the tax rate. State law sets the framework and the limits, and school districts can really only adjust within those narrow limits. Just because you have increased valuation in your district does not always mean that a school district is raking in the cash. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Usually there are corresponding reductions in state aid to help you control that spending limit, and that's designed there for equitable per pupil amounts. And at the bottom line is cutting taxes doesn't automatically remove wasteful spending. Most levies really do fund a district's core needs. So I was just going to kind of touch base with Tracy. So, and I was just sort of curious, is there some ways that as a board that you've helped your community better understand how property taxes work?
Hey, Mike, there's a question in the chat
Oh,
about
oh,
Dylan's rule.
oh yeah.
I didn't know
Sorry.
if you saw that, but wanted to point that out
Oh,
real
thank you. I
quick.
appreciate that. Yeah, so Dillon's rule actually comes from the 1800s, and it was an Iowa Supreme Court judge. I can't remember what his first name is, but Dillon. It's a great picture of him. He looks like your local brewer. But what he basically says is that school districts can only do what the legislature tells them they can do. They have really no control. Cities and counties are under what's home rule. And home rule just says as long as you are not explicitly doing something against the legislature or against federal law, then you can probably go ahead and do it. So cities and counties have a little more leeway in setting levies or creating levies at times. School districts do not. School districts are very, very specific that they can only do what's in code or what's in admin rules, or which is known as administrative rules. And so that really limits school districts' ability for flexibility. When we talk about, bringing back to that fund chart that I had up there, what the biggest thing there is that you can't transfer dollars across funds, right? You cannot take those debt service dollars and put them to your general fund and use them for salaries. And while general fund can be used for anything, you could pay off some debt with it. You could do construction with it. It's best not to, because as a school district, we are essentially in the people business, right? We are educating students. Those are people. We have staff, and salaries and benefits make up anywhere between 75 to 85% of any school district's expenditures. So likely you're not going to be able to afford some of those, other expenditures for technology, for buses, or for facilities out of your general fund. You're going to want to use those other funds. So hopefully that answers the question. All right. Thanks, Tracy. I didn't catch that.
No, that wasn't my question.
No, yeah. So, well, I still have my question for you, though.
Okay.
Is there some ways that you've helped your community better understand how property taxes work?
As I said, I'm not the most finance savvy person. As a board, we get some public participation. We don't get a ton. We have only had, I think this last year we had some. They actually tend to, I don't know if circumvent us is the correct term, but they tend to email our finance officer. Our community is very comfortable doing that, which is way okay with me. But I know as far as trying to communicate that, when I was campaigning, I would say I probably needed a little more education when I did that, because it's a very complex system and it is kind of hard to explain to a layperson.
Yeah. No,
So
it
I
is.
don't know if that answers the question as much, but trying, I also don't think there is a fantastic understanding of how the taxation, we are a property poor district.
Mhm.
So how that tends to impact sometimes the financing when they look at a different district that is also in our area, and they are tend to be a very property rich area. So you see that disparity, and I don't know that everyone understands that difference.
Yeah, no, that's a valid point, and it's worth bringing up again. Is when you are property poor, you tend to, you're going to have a higher rate, especially a general fund rate. While you may have a uniform levy, that's sort of the first level of finance for school districts, as state aid comes in and brings it up to a certain foundation level. But a school district is responsible for the remainder of that additional levy for the general fund, and that is where that tax rate can be much, much higher for school districts that might be considered property poor that have a lower valuation per pupil. And that is very difficult to explain. It's because it's hard to understand that maybe in your district, you're, likely a lot more residential than agriculture. But we don't go too far away from your district, and we have some of the richest agricultural land in our state. And that produces high valuations per pupil. So especially with smaller rural districts. So I think one of the other questions I just wanted to ask you is, are there any instances or in ways that you've highlighted that importance of local control when speaking with the legislators?
I know we do definitely when we meet with our legislators and trying to, especially our one legislator who sends their children to parochial school that is in our district, and trying to get that individual to understand not only the uniqueness of our district, but also we tend to have a very um, high proportion of special education. And that definitely hits our budget kind of hard. So trying to get them to understand that funding kind of discrepancy is definitely something that they don't tend to understand, that is very unique, that is different from, say, a private school that does not uh, cater or accommodate to those students.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of those the needs of those students are served by the school district anyway, and so it does come out of the school district. So, and that's a good point about special education. The state does provide some funding, and the state has made some or the legislature has made some headway in trying to just do all state funding for special education. But again, it sort of takes away from that local control. And also, at the end of the day, the state generally does not provide enough dollars for special education funding. But as a school district, you are required to spend the funds to educate those children, pretty much no matter the cost. And
Right.
so anything on top of that does come out as property taxes in the end. It does come out when you have to do a cash reserve levy to be able to afford to pay the expenses that you've already paid for those children. Well, thanks, Tracy.
Thanks, guys, for having me.
Yeah. So one of the last things I do want to go over is really just some of the property tax reform that happened last year. So none of the bills passed. So I'm not going to go necessarily into the specifics of the bill. But there were, of all the proposals, the elements, there was some consistency here. A lot of it had to do with removal or reduction of the residential and commercial rollback. Again, that would increase your taxable valuations going up to that assessed value. They were going to do that in conjunction with lowering certain tax rates, like the uniform levy or changing the maximum tax rates on the PEPAL and the debt service. However, there was still some disparity there from district to district. There would also be additional tax exemptions, and there would also be additional revenue limits on, let's say, the management fund, which was a big one because every district has a management fund. So some of the key issues to any of this proposed legislation is it's difficult, and it's very difficult for the legislators to come up with a good plan for this. They are passionate about trying to provide additional property tax relief. And to be fair, there are people out there that this is impact these higher property valuations are really impacting, especially if they are on a fixed income. But what we did learn with all the proposals is that a one-size-fits-all will impact districts differently. So especially with the rollback elimination, while this may simplify property taxes by reducing rates up front and reducing the rollback over time, one of the challenges with this is that in the end, homeowners may end up paying more in the long run. That's something that we saw on every piece of the legislation that came out. Also, again, uniform levy and foundation level changes. This really puts more reliance on the state to provide adequate funding. And that's difficult because they don't necessarily provide adequate increases over time. And then there's also the maximum levy rate reductions. So due to increasing the taxable valuations, they want to come in and reduce the rate for, let's say, debt service or PEPAL. But again, this will impact districts very differently. As you know, Tracy pointed out, she lives in a highly residential district. Outside of her district is a highly agriculture. By reducing those rates between those two districts, residential is impacted much, much differently than in agriculture. And the management fund. So undue limits on the management fund can really hamper a district's ability to respond to urgent needs. And for those that aren't too familiar with the management fund, this is how a school district does pay for, let's say, insurance, workman's comp, and other claims. And so those come up quickly at times, especially as we've all learned the word derecho recently in the last several years. The management fund plays a key role in helping districts recover from any damages from, let's say, a derecho or tornado or straight line wind storms. So if there's one takeaway that I really want to just give to everybody, with all of this, including the advocacy stuff that Michelle talked about, is that if you don't tell the story of your district, then you're going to allow somebody else to. And you probably will not like the story that they're telling. So it's just really important to understand your district, understand the property, understand programs in your district so that you can advocate on those on your behalf of your district. Understand the property tax rates, understand what it does to your homeowners, what it does to your business community, and be able to explain that and be able to explain if there are changes, if there are increases, why these are worthwhile and why, and bring it down to those kids, bring it down to those students, so they really understand the impact and it's not just a number on their tax bill. All right. You have anything else?
I do not have anything else to add for you guys, but if there are questions, please ask us. You can type them in the chat if you don't feel comfortable. Otherwise, you can totally unmute yourself and just ask us. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah.
And if you can't think of any now, it's okay. We're always here. You can email us. We won't feel offended if you don't have questions. I know we gave you a lot of info. Going once, going twice. Okay, well, thank you guys all for joining us today. Oh,
Sorry, Lila Starr here, West Des Moines School Board. So this has been really helpful, and I want to thank you for putting it on. I understand there's 43 school districts going out for a bond referendum this year. I wonder if IASB has any specific talking points about how to come at it from the standpoint of why so many districts are going out after bond referendums at this particular point in time.
I mean, I guess from a individual school district standpoint, I would say the response is why you go out for a bond in the first place. I don't exactly know the reasoning of why there's so many. I do think, just so you guys know,
Okay.
bond issues are only allowed to be voted on in the November elections now, rather than at special elections throughout the year. So I think maybe if we used to add them all up over a year, there could have been closer to that. I would say, lower state funding could contribute to that. Also, building new school buildings is very expensive. School districts don't have that kind of cash on hand. Even though, we have SAVE, which is dedicated to school infrastructure, it's generally not enough. So I would say school buildings are getting older. The state of Iowa is getting older. Your school districts are older. There's reasons districts go out for bond issues. I don't know. I guess we could look at it historically, but I don't know if there's any more. It's just because they've all been condensed on this November date now. So it does seem like there's more, but I would say if your district is asking for your voters to approve a bond issue, tell them the reasons why. Like Mike said, always bring it back to students. So we don't really have, I guess, general talking points for why there would be a bond issue other than, we need a new building, we need new facilities, we expect our students to be taken care of, all of the usual things that you guys probably know. But yeah, I guess I don't know if there's a reason for why there's more.
Well, I mean, there could be one reason, and this is more of a hypothesis than stated, but we had a lot of consolidations of school districts and a lot of buildings being built in the 60s and 70s as we went down from over 500 school districts, or I think we're over 700 in the 60s and getting it down to roughly around 400 to 500 in the 70s. A lot of buildings were built then. And just the shelf life in those buildings is all coming due at the same time. Similar to the same way that, a lot of the bridges in our state, things like that, that sort of infrastructure, a lot of it was all built around the same time. And so it's just they're coming to their end of life.
Any other questions we can answer? Well, like I said, again, if you do, please email us. Again, thank you to Tracy for joining us. It's always good to have a board member on here. But yeah, thank you guys for joining us today, and I'm sure we'll talk to you guys soon.